For 3,000 years the galaxy had lived in silence. It was not the natural silence of calm stars or drifting dust, but a silence that came after great violence. Long ago the galaxy had been on fire. Empires had risen and fallen. Planets had burned. Fleets had clashed across light years, and billions had died. In that age, one species had stood out above all others. A species that turned war into art and survival into legend. Humanity had fought so fiercely that even the most savage alien empires had been forced to sign peace. The peace that followed lasted for generations beyond counting. Alien rulers who had once dreamed of conquest turned their efforts to trade, culture, and soft politics. Weapons rusted, warships were recycled into civilian transports, soldiers became scholars and entertainers. The galaxy began to forget what real war felt like. Children grew up hearing only stories of battles, stories that sounded more like myths than truth. And as centuries passed, fear faded into comfort. The Drath Collective, however, did not forget. They had once been strong, but compared to humanity, they had been small players in the ancient wars. For 3,000 years they waited, watching the galaxy grow weak. They watched the humans most of all. To them, humanity looked tired, chained by old treaties, forced into silence by endless rules. The Drath believed humans had buried their teeth, and when the collective finally declared war, they believed the timing was perfect. The announcement came like thunder. In the Grand Galactic Council, the Drath speaker raised its many arms and shouted words of fire. It declared that the age of peace was finished, that the galaxy had become soft, and that the Drath would rise as rightful rulers of the stars. Many alien leaders panicked. Some begged for negotiation. Others cried that no one should break the peace. But across the chambers, all eyes turned to the humans. For 3,000 years, humanity had sat silent at the council tables. They had followed every law, every treaty, their voices calm, their ships hidden, their armies quiet. Now the galaxy wanted to know what they would say. At first, humanity said nothing. Their representatives sat still, their expression unreadable. The silence stretched until the entire chamber seemed to freeze. The Drath thought it was fear. Other species thought it was hesitation. But then, very slowly, the human smiled. It was not the smile of joy or kindness or relief. It was cold. It was sharp. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting a very long time. And in that single smile, many old species felt an ancient fear crawl up their spines. Far from the council, on Earth itself, alarms began to ring. In bunkers deep below the oceans, hidden rooms lit up for the first time in thousands of years. Old codes were entered, awakening systems that had been maintained in shadows. The galaxy thought humanity had forgotten war, but humanity had never forgotten. They had only hidden. Training academies still existed, disguised as schools. Factories still produced weapons in secret, disguised as mining operations. Fleets were hidden in black space, invisible to alien eyes, maintained by silence and patience. Humanity had spent 3,000 years pretending to be asleep, and now, with the Drath's declaration, they were awake again. In the streets of human colonies, the news spread fast. Some people cheered, some trembled, but none were surprised. Deep down, every human had known that peace could not last forever. War was part of their nature, part of their blood. Generations had been raised with secret lessons, quiet stories of what to do when the call came. Now the call had come. Across planets and stations, men and women stepped forward to answer. Alien spies tried to report back what they saw, but their messages were confusing. They wrote that humans were not afraid, that humans did not protest the end of peace. Instead, they saw soldiers smiling as they prepared. They saw admirals speaking with calm voices, making plans that had clearly been waiting for centuries. They saw a species not surprised but ready. It was as if the humans had been waiting for someone to break the silence. In the council chambers, the Drath mocked humanity. They called them relics, weak creatures who had been chained too long by rules. But their laughter stopped when human fleets began to move. Silent black warships cloaked for ages turned their engines toward the borders. The galaxy had thought humans were slow and heavy, yet their ships moved with deadly precision. Ancient signals lit up across the stars, each one a message only humans could read. The old network of war was alive again, and through it all the humans kept smiling. It was not arrogance. It was not madness. It was the smile of a predator that had been denied the hunt for too long. 3,000 years of peace had been enough to make every other species forget. But not humanity. Humanity remembered. Humanity waited, and now as the first alien fleets prepared to cross the borders, the humans whispered to themselves a promise. The promise was simple. If war had returned, then the galaxy would soon remember why peace had been forced in the first place. The smile on their faces was not the smile of relief or kindness. It was the smile of wolves hearing the sound of prey in the forest again. The Drath thought they had started a war. But the truth was different. They had ended humanity's patience, and now the galaxy would see what that meant. The galaxy believed that humanity had turned away from violence. For 3,000 years, alien scholars told their children that humans had finally learned peace, that the fierce warriors of old had buried their weapons and broken their swords. It was a comfortable story, and everyone wanted to believe it. But the truth was not so simple. Humanity had not abandoned war. Humanity had hidden it. Deep beneath the oceans of Earth, in caverns carved out of stone and steel, there were places the galaxy had never seen. Whole fleets slept in silence, wrapped in shrouds of cloaking fields. Massive starships floated in black vaults, their power cores pulsing softly like sleeping beasts. Maintenance drones tended them without rest, keeping the machines alive for a day that many thought would never come. On the surface, humans lived ordinary lives, but under the surface, the arsenal waited. Even on distant colonies, the story was the same. A mining facility on a cold moon secretly built rail cannons. A research lab on a barren asteroid tested weapons that could shatter entire fleets. A training school disguised as a university drilled young men and women in tactics, discipline, and survival. Every human colony had two faces. One face smiled at the galaxy with calm words of peace. The other face sharpened its blades in silence. When the Drath Collective sent its first fleets toward human borders, the truth began to emerge. Alien spies reported that the humans had mobilized with frightening speed. Entire divisions of soldiers appeared overnight, each unit drilled to perfection. Weapons that no one had seen for thousands of years were rolled out as if they had just been built. Alien leaders could not understand how a species that had lived in peace for so long could respond with such readiness. They did not realize that peace had been an act, a mass humanity war while waiting. On Earth, the High Admiralty gathered in a chamber that had not been used since the last war. Holographic stars filled the air, glowing with the positions of enemy fleets. The admiral stood silently for a moment, remembering the oaths their ancestors had sworn. Then, with steady voices, they activated codes that had been passed down through hidden channels. Across human space, beacons lit up. Black warships stirred in their vaults. Orbital platforms unlocked their weapon arrays. Civilian transports that had always been a little too large, a little too armored, revealed themselves as warships in disguise. Alien merchants who traded with human colonies began to see strange movements. They reported that whole mining operations had gone dark. Cargo fleets that once carried grain and ore now carried soldiers and weapons. And wherever they looked, they saw the same thing. Humans smiling. Not the warm smile of friends, but the sharp smile of people who knew something others did not. It frightened the merchants so much that some refused to travel near Earth again. The Drath Collective laughed when they heard the rumors. They believed it was all bluff, an illusion of power. They told their people that humanity had grown soft, that the galaxy had nothing to fear. They spoke as if they already held victory. But in the shadows of human space, the arsenal awakened. The training of soldiers had never stopped. In secret bases hidden on frozen planets and deep deserts, generations had been raised with one purpose. They were taught history not as dry lessons, but as living memory. They were told of battles where humanity had stood against empires alone. They were told that peace was only a pause, not an end. And so when the call came, they did not hesitate. They stepped forward as if they had been waiting their whole lives. Among alien leaders, debates broke out. Some argued that the humans were bluffing. Others whispered that perhaps the old stories were true. They remembered fragments of history, the times when entire empires had united just to stop Earth's advance. They remembered whispers that the peace treaty was not a gift but a demand, signed in fear. And now, watching the hidden fleets rise again, they wondered if the galaxy had made a mistake by believing humans had changed. In the council chambers, the human representative finally spoke. Their words were calm, simple, and without anger. They did not shout like the Drath. They did not beg like the weaker races. They only said that humanity would defend itself, and that the Drath would regret waking what had slept. The words were not dramatic, but they spread across the stars like a storm. Every species felt the weight of them, the quiet confidence that no one else could match. In the darkness of space, one by one, the forgotten arsenals revealed themselves. Planets that seemed poor and weak suddenly raised shields that no one had known existed. Civilian stations became fortresses overnight. Massive starships emerged from cloaked fields that had hidden them for centuries. To the aliens who watched, it was as if the dead had risen. The Drath commanders preparing their invasion began to feel unease. Their intelligence had told them humanity was weak. Their advisors had told them humans had grown soft. Yet the more they studied the movements, the more they realized how wrong they might be. The humans had not only prepared, they had prepared for a war far larger than anyone expected. On Earth, as the first fleets warmed their engines, the leaders stood in silence. They remembered the ancient wars, the blood that had bought the peace. They knew that once again the galaxy had forgotten why peace had been forced. Now they would remind them. Humanity did not want war, but if war had come, then they would fight with everything they had hidden for 3,000 years. And so the arsenal was no longer forgotten. It was awake. It was ready. And the galaxy would soon learn that while other species grew soft in peace, humanity had used every moment to sharpen its blade. The Drath Collective moved with arrogance. Their fleets were vast and their commanders filled with pride. For years they had planned this invasion, believing it would be a swift and glorious victory. Their warlords promised that within a month Earth would kneel and humanity would be broken. They believed they would burn the first human colonies and force the rest of the galaxy to bow to their strength. Their ships crossed into human space like hunters entering a forest, but they did not realize that they were walking into the territory of wolves. At first, the humans did not resist. When the Drath fleets arrived at the edge of human colonies, they found empty stations and abandoned satellites. There were no patrols, no fleets rushing to defend the borders, no armies standing in their way. The Drath commanders laughed and told their soldiers that humans had already fled. They broadcast messages across the stars declaring humanity weak and cowardly, yet deep in their hearts a quiet unease began to grow. The first colony they attacked was silent. Its cities seemed deserted, its lights dark. The Drath ships moved in cautiously, scanning for traps, but they found nothing. They descended on the planet, prepared to plant their flag. And that was when the trap closed. From the blackness of space, hundreds of human warships lit their engines all at once. They had been there the entire time, cloaked and waiting. The sudden flare of light was like 1,000 suns igniting at once. The Drath fleet, caught in the open, had no time to form ranks. Human ships encircled them with perfect precision, forming a wall of steel and fire. On every Drath screen, human faces appeared, calm, steady, merciless. A human admiral leaned forward, his voice cutting through the silence. He did not shout, he did not threaten. He only said, "You have woken us. Now you will remember." Then the attack began. The first salvo was devastating. Human rail cannons tore through Drath shields like they were made of glass. Plasma lances cut through hulls in clean lines, leaving burning wrecks drifting in the void. The Drath responded with their own weapons, but their firepower was clumsy and scattered compared to the focused fury of the humans. Every shot the humans fired struck true, every maneuver was perfect. It was not just battle, it was execution. The Drath screamed orders, but panic spread. Their soldiers had trained for war, but not for this kind of war. They were used to fighting enemies who hesitated, who broke under pressure. Humanity did not hesitate. Humanity pressed harder with every second, moving like predators who had been starved for too long. The Drath saw the cold smiles on human faces as ship after ship exploded around them. One Drath commander sent out a desperate message to the rest of the collective. They were ready. We were wrong. This is not weakness, this is... His transmission ended in static as his ship was split apart by a human salvo. Within hours, the first invasion fleet was gone. Wreckage floated silently, fire still burning in the void. Not a single human ship had been destroyed. The few Drath survivors who managed to escape fled in terror, broadcasting warnings that spread across the galaxy. Their words carried fear that no one had heard in thousands of years. They said the humans were not like the others. They said the humans smiled while killing. When news of the first strike reached the council, the chamber fell silent. The Drath had promised an easy victory, but instead their mighty fleet had been erased. Other species, who had once laughed at the idea of human strength, now felt the chill of fear. They remembered old stories told by their ancestors, stories of humanity carving through empires, of fleets that fought to the last ship, of warriors who smiled in battle because it was where they belonged. The Drath, unwilling to admit defeat, sent more fleets. They believed the first loss was a mistake, an unlucky surprise. But every fleet that entered human space met the same fate. Cloaked warships waited in the dark, ambushing them with perfect timing. Human commanders spoke little, their orders simple and efficient. Their soldiers fought with terrifying discipline, each unit moving as though guided by one mind. The galaxy watched as fleet after fleet of the Drath disappeared into silence. What terrified the other species most was not the human weapons, though they were powerful. It was the way the humans fought. They did not rage. They did not gloat. They did not waste words. They moved like machines of flesh and blood, patient and cold. And always, when victory came, there was that same quiet smile on their faces. In the ruins of the first battlefield, human crews searched the wreckage. They recovered supplies, captured data, and left nothing for the enemy. When alien observers asked why they showed no mercy, the humans gave no answer. Mercy was not part of their war. The Drath had chosen this path, and humanity would finish it. The galaxy now understood that the first strike was more than a battle. It was a message. Humanity had been silent for 3,000 years, but they had not forgotten who they were. They had not forgotten what war was. And now, with cold smiles and steady hands, they would teach the galaxy again. The Drath thought they had declared war on a weakened species. Instead, they had opened the door to an ancient nightmare. And as the humans prepared their next moves, the rest of the galaxy could only watch in dread, wondering how far this war would go and who would be left standing when it ended. The galaxy had lived too long in peace. For 3,000 years, generations of aliens had grown soft, believing war was only a story told by their ancestors. They convinced themselves that humanity had changed, that the fierce warriors of old had been tamed by treaties and rules. They told themselves that Earth was safe, that the galaxy had evolved beyond blood and fire. That illusion shattered the moment humanity struck back. The destruction of the Drath fleet sent shockwaves across the stars. Whole sectors that had once trusted in the power of the collective now whispered in fear. News traveled faster than light, carried not only by transmissions but by the eyes of refugees and the memories of survivors. They spoke of human warships appearing from shadows, of weapons that tore through fleets with surgical precision, of admirals who spoke in calm voices before unleashing storms of fire. They spoke of human soldiers who smiled with cold delight as they destroyed their enemies. And the galaxy listened. Alien leaders gathered in secret chambers, their voices filled with fear. Some argued that humanity was bluffing, that their victories were tricks or illusions. But others remembered. They remembered what their ancestors had written in old records that many had dismissed as exaggeration. They remembered that humanity had once fought 10 empires at once and survived. They remembered whispers that the peace treaty had not been a gift, but a demand. They remembered the word that had haunted their species for millennia, Deathworlders. The Drath Collective tried to regain control of the narrative. They sent broadcasts across the galaxy claiming that the first defeats were accidents, that humanity had only won through surprise and luck. They promised that their next fleets would crush Earth completely. But no one believed them. The galaxy had seen too much. The illusion of Drath strength had cracked, and through that crack the shadow of humanity rose again. On the battlefield, the truth became undeniable. Every new fleet the Drath sent was erased with terrifying speed. Human ships moved as though they had trained for this moment for centuries, and in truth they had. Entire generations had been raised in silence, waiting for the call. Now they fought with a precision that no other species could match. The Drath were not facing a rusty, forgotten army. They were facing predators who had sharpened their claws in secret for 3,000 years. The more the galaxy watched, the more they realized the difference. Other species fought with passion or fear. Humanity fought with something colder. They fought with patience, with discipline, with memory. Their tactics were not chaotic, not wild. Every move was exact, every strike measured. To the Drath, it was as if they were not fighting an enemy of flesh, but an ancient machine designed for one purpose: to kill. The illusion of peace collapsed further when human fleets began to push beyond defense. At first, they had waited for the Drath to come. But once the first invasions were destroyed, humanity struck outward. They moved into Drath territory with silent confidence. Planets that had been safe for millennia suddenly found themselves under siege. Drath colonies burned one by one, their defenses falling in hours. For every ship the collective sent, humanity sent 3. For every soldier the Drath raised, humanity raised 10. It became clear to all that humanity had not simply prepared for defense. They had prepared for conquest, should the need ever arise. Alien leaders begged the Council to act, but the Council was powerless. They had no fleet strong enough to stand against Earth. Their words meant nothing to a species that had already decided the course of war. All they could do was watch and remember the mistake they had made. They had believed humanity was safe. They had believed the illusion. Now the illusion was shattered, and the reality was far worse than they had imagined. In the ruins of their shattered fleets, the Drath began to understand. They had thought humanity weak, but what they had awakened was a nightmare. They saw how humans moved through war not with fear but with familiarity. They saw how humans fought not for survival but because war was where they belonged. And they saw the cold smiles that never left their enemies' faces. Those smiles told the truth. Humanity did not fear war. Humanity welcomed it. The galaxy tried to explain it away. Scholars claimed that Earth's harsh environment had made them this way. Philosophers said that war was in their blood. But none of those explanations brought comfort. It did not matter why humanity fought like this. What mattered was that they did. And now that they had been awakened, no one knew how far they would go. As the Drath burned, other species whispered in dread. They asked themselves questions they had not asked in centuries. What if the humans did not stop with the Drath? What if this war was only the beginning? What if the peace they had enjoyed had only been a pause? And now the galaxy would burn again under human hands. The answers were not spoken, but they were felt in every council chamber and every colony. The illusion was gone. The galaxy had thought it was safe. Now it knew the truth. Peace had been forced upon them, not granted. Humanity had been silent not because they had forgotten war, but because they had been waiting for someone foolish enough to start it again. The Drath had been that fool, and the galaxy would suffer the consequences. The Drath Collective had begun this war with fire in their voices and arrogance in their hearts. They believed themselves destined to rule the stars, certain that humanity had grown weak and harmless. Now they begged for peace, their once mighty fleets broken into drifting wrecks, their colonies in ruins, their soldiers scattered. The galaxy that had once watched their rise with fear now watched their fall with silence. But if the Drath thought humanity would accept their surrender quickly, they were wrong. Humanity remembered everything. They remembered the wars of old, when peace had been forced upon the galaxy only after rivers of blood had been spilled. They remembered the countless lives lost to the ambitions of alien empires. They remembered being told to chain their weapons, to bury their strength, to trust that others would never seek war again. The Drath's declaration had proven that those promises were lies, and humanity had no patience left for lies. When the Drath envoys arrived, their bodies trembling with desperation, they pleaded for forgiveness. They promised to disarm, to surrender their fleets, to submit to council law. They swore they would never raise arms against Earth again. But the humans listened with cold eyes and colder hearts. The High Admiral spoke only one sentence in reply. Peace is not granted, it is enforced. Those words spread across the stars like thunder, and the galaxy knew then that the war was far from over. Human fleets pressed deeper into Drath space, not stopping at the borders, not slowing for negotiations. Entire systems fell in silence, their defenses crumbling against the relentless advance. Drath citizens looked up at the sky and saw human warships blotting out their suns. Cities surrendered before a single shot was fired, for they had seen what resistance meant. Where the Drath had once ruled with arrogance, humanity now ruled with inevitability. Other alien races watching from the safety of their own territories trembled. They had once believed they were safe, that Earth would never seek war again. Now they saw a different truth. Humanity had not become weak in peace, they had become patient. They had not lost their hunger. They had starved it until the moment came to release it. And when that moment came, their power was greater than ever before. The reckoning was not just for the Drath, it was for the galaxy. Whispers spread in every council chamber. What if humanity did not stop? What if the fall of the Drath was only the beginning? Some argued that Earth would return to silence once vengeance was taken. Others feared that after 3,000 years of waiting, humanity would not settle for silence again. No one dared to challenge them, for no one had the strength. The great empires that had once believed themselves untouchable now clung to peace like a fragile shield. praying that Earth would not turn its gaze upon them. For the humans, there was no joy in the slaughter, but neither was there sorrow. They moved with the cold certainty of a storm, sweeping through space with precision and finality. Soldiers fought not with rage but with discipline, their eyes steady, their faces calm. Admirals gave their orders in voices as quiet as whispers, yet those whispers carried the weight of worlds. Humanity was not fighting simply to win a war. They were sending a message, one that no species could ignore. The message was carved into the stars themselves: never again mistake silence for weakness. Humanity had endured 3,000 years of forced peace, but now the galaxy would remember why that peace had lasted so long. It had lasted because Earth had allowed it. It had lasted because every empire knew, deep in its bones, what would happen if humans were provoked. The Drath had been arrogant enough to forget. Now they paid the price with fire and ruin. As the last Drath fleets fell, the survivors scattered like ashes on the wind. Some fled to the edges of the galaxy, hoping to escape the shadow of Earth. Others surrendered completely, abandoning their weapons and kneeling before human soldiers. But humanity did not smile in victory as other species might have. Their smiles were colder, sharper. The smiles of predators who had hunted and fed. They did not celebrate the end of war. They prepared for what would come next. When the council gathered one final time to discuss the fate of the Drath, the human representatives stood before them. Their words were calm, each syllable heavy with truth. "You thought peace was eternal," they said. "You thought we had forgotten. Now you see, we did not forget, we waited, and we will wait again. If war comes, we will be ready. If peace is broken, we will be the ones who end it." That is the law of humanity. That is the law of survival. No one argued. No one dared. Across the galaxy, every leader lowered their head in silence. They understood that humanity's reckoning was not just with the Drath, it was with the very idea that Earth could ever be ignored again. The war had proven the truth. Humanity was not a relic of the past. They were the storm waiting in the dark, the blade hidden in the sheath, the wolves behind the smile. The reckoning had come, and with it, the galaxy remembered, and though the stars would shine with silence again, every species lived with the same thought burning in their minds. If war ever returned, if another empire ever grew arrogant enough to challenge Earth, they knew what they would see. They would see the humans smile coldly, and they would remember why peace was never a choice but a command.